If you're new to the channel, settle in, turn down the lights, and remember, some calls stay with officers forever. Not because of what they saw, but because of what they heard. This is one of those calls. And according to the deputy involved, he still keeps a copy of the recording locked away in a drawer he refuses to open. Because every time he hears it, the voice sounds a little closer. My name is Ethan Cole. At least that's the name I'll use. For 12 years, I worked patrol for a sheriff's department in a rural county tucked into the mountains of Northern California. Most people imagine law enforcement as non-stop action, chases, shootings, major crimes. The reality is usually much less exciting. Most nights consisted of welfare checks, noise complaints, traffic collisions, and the occasional drunk stumbling out of a bar after last call. The county I worked in was mostly forests, winding back roads, ranch properties, and tiny forgotten communities that barely appeared on maps. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. The kind of place where families had lived for generations. The kind of place where old stories never really died. And if there was one thing deputies learned quickly, it was that every town had its legends. Most were harmless. Stories parents told their kids. Campfire tales. Local folklore. The kind of things nobody actually believed. At least that's what we told ourselves. The night everything happened started like any other. It was late October. The air had that cold bite that settles into the mountains before winter arrives. My shift started at 6 in the evening. By midnight, the roads were mostly empty. The occasional semi-truck rolled through. A few ranchers were still awake. Otherwise, the county belonged to the darkness. I was parked near an old gas station on Highway 44, finishing paperwork from a vehicle stop. The radio crackled occasionally with routine traffic. Nothing unusual. I remember checking the clock. 12:37 a.m. Only a few hours left before shift change. Then dispatch came over the radio. Ethan, stand by for a possible welfare check. I grabbed the microphone and answered, "Go ahead." There was a pause. Not unusual, but something about it felt different. Like the dispatcher was trying to decide how to explain what she had just heard. Finally, she spoke. Received a 911 call from a juvenile female. I sat up straighter. Juvenile calls always got attention, especially at that hour. What did she report? Another pause. She didn't provide much information. Meaning, she was crying. The dispatcher that night was named Lisa. I'd worked with her for years. She wasn't easily rattled, but I could hear uncertainty in her voice. That got my attention immediately. "What exactly did she say?" I asked. Lisa shuffled papers. According to the recording, the caller stated. She stopped for a moment, almost like she didn't want to repeat it. Then she continued. "Please hurry. He's coming back." The words hung in the silence. I immediately grabbed my notebook. Age? Unknown. Location? That's where things get weird. I frowned. Weird how? The call pinged to an address. So what's the problem? Another pause. Then Lisa said something that made me put down my pen. The address has been vacant for years. I remember staring through the windshield. The gas station lights reflected off the patrol car hood. Everything suddenly felt quieter. What address? Lisa read it from the report. 187 Hollow Creek Road. I didn't recognize it immediately. Then it clicked. The old Harper property. A farmhouse sitting several miles outside town. Abandoned. Falling apart. No power, no residents, nothing. The county occasionally received trespassing complaints from teenagers exploring the property. But nobody lived there. Hadn't for years. "You sure the location is correct?" I asked. "Positive. Maybe a cell phone glitch. Could be." But neither of us sounded convinced. Cell tower errors happen, yet not often enough to explain a crying child calling 911 from an empty house. I started the engine. Show me en route. Copy. As I pulled onto the highway, Lisa added, "One more thing. Go ahead." The line stayed open for approximately 20 seconds. I adjusted the radio volume. And, when dispatch attempted verbal contact, the caller never responded. What happened? The line disconnected. Battery died? Maybe. She paused again, then quietly said, or somebody hung up. The drive took about 20 minutes. The farther I traveled, the fewer signs of civilization remained. Streetlights disappeared. Houses became scarce. The road narrowed. Tall pine trees crowded both sides of the pavement. Their branches swayed in the wind. The darkness beyond them looked endless. I remember telling myself this would probably turn out to be nothing. Maybe kids prank calling. Maybe squatters. Maybe a bad GPS location. There was always a logical explanation, always. At least that's what I believed back then. As I continued down Hollow Creek Road, I found myself thinking about all the stories I'd heard over the years. Every deputy who spent enough time in the county eventually learned the names of certain places. Places people talked about in lowered voices. Places connected to tragedies, disappearances, and rumors that never seemed to go away. The Harper farmhouse was one of those places. Even before I knew anything about Emily Harper, I remembered hearing older deputies mention the property during late-night conversations at the station. They never claimed anything supernatural had happened there. Law enforcement officers aren't exactly known for believing ghost stories. But there was always something unusual about the way they talked about that house. The way conversation seemed to end whenever its name came up. The way nobody volunteered to patrol Hollow Creek Road unless they absolutely had to. At the time, I assumed it was because of the missing child case. Looking back now, I think there was more to it than that. The deeper I drove into the forest, the more isolated everything became. My headlights were the only source of light for miles. The trees seemed taller here, older somehow. Their branches twisted together overhead, creating a tunnel of darkness that swallowed the road ahead. Every few minutes, I found myself checking the rearview mirror. Not because I expected to see another vehicle. Traffic out here was practically non-existent after midnight, but because I couldn't shake the strange feeling that I wasn't alone. Years in law enforcement teach you to trust instincts. Most of the time, those instincts are based on small details your brain notices before you're consciously aware of them. And every instinct I had was telling me that this call wasn't routine. About halfway there, Lisa called again. "Ethan, go ahead." I pulled additional records on the property. "Anything useful?" "Maybe." "What do you have?" There was hesitation. Then she said, "The address is connected to an old missing persons case." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "What kind of missing persons case?" "A child." The road suddenly felt much longer. "What child?" "Female. 8 years old." I felt a chill despite the heater running. "When?" 3 years ago." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "She vanished." "From the property?" "Yes." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Finally, I asked, "Was she ever found?" Lisa's answer came immediately. "No." Then she added something else. The original search involved more than 200 volunteers. Search teams combed the woods, rivers, abandoned structures, caves, and every property within 15 miles. Helicopters flew overhead for days. K9 units tracked every possible lead. They never found a single trace of her. No clothing? No. Backpack? No. Footprints? Nothing. The silence returned, because missing children usually leave something behind. A clue, a mistake, a trail. Emily Harper had left nothing. It was as if she had simply vanished. I requested the child's name. Lisa checked the file, then answered, "Emily Harper." The name didn't mean anything to me initially. 3 years earlier, I had been working in a neighboring district. I vaguely remembered hearing about a missing child case, but details were scarce. Yet something about this one felt different. Maybe because of the timing, maybe because of the call, or maybe because deep down, I already knew something wasn't right. At 1:02 a.m., I turned onto Hollow Creek Road. The pavement ended almost immediately. Dirt and gravel replaced asphalt. My headlights illuminated a narrow path, cutting through dense forest. The property sat nearly 2 miles off the main road, completely isolated. The kind of place where nobody accidentally ended up. The farther I drove, the more uneasy I felt. Not scared, just alert. Years in law enforcement teach you to trust instincts, and every instinct I had was telling me something was wrong. Then I saw it. The farmhouse, standing alone in a clearing, dark, silent, motionless. The structure looked older than I remembered. Paint peeling, windows broken, porch sagging. The roof partially collapsed on one side. It looked abandoned, exactly like dispatch had described. Yet something immediately caught my attention. A faint glow inside the house. I slowed the patrol vehicle and stared. Maybe I was imagining it. But there it was, a small light deep inside the structure, moving very slowly, as if someone were carrying a flashlight. My pulse quickened. I grabbed the radio. Dispatch. Go ahead, I'm on scene. What do you have? I kept watching the window. The light disappeared, then returned. For just a second, long enough to confirm I wasn't imagining it, I swallowed, then answered, I think somebody's inside. The wind suddenly picked up. Tree branches creaked overhead. Leaves skittered across the dirt driveway. I stepped out of the patrol vehicle. The cold hit immediately. Everything felt wrong. Too quiet, no insects, no animals, nothing. Just wind, and the old farmhouse staring back at me from the darkness. I rested my hand on my holster and began walking toward the porch. Each step echoed louder than it should have. The wooden stairs groaned beneath my boots. I shined my flashlight across the front door. Locked, dust-covered, undisturbed, no obvious signs of entry. Yet I knew what I'd seen. Someone had been inside, or something had. Then my radio crackled so suddenly it nearly made me jump. Ethan, it was Lisa. You still there? I pressed the microphone. Go ahead. There was silence. Then she spoke. Her voice sounded different than before. More serious, more concerned. Ethan, what? I just listened to the original 911 recording again. I looked toward the dark windows. What about it? Several seconds passed. Then Lisa said something that would change everything. Something that would turn a routine welfare check into the most terrifying investigation of my career. The little girl finally gave her name. I froze. What? There's a section we missed because she whispered it. My heart pounded. Lisa, what name did she give? The answer came softly, almost like she was afraid to say it. Emily Harper. Part 2. Emily's room. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The cold night air suddenly felt heavier. The old farmhouse stood motionless in front of me, while Lisa's words echoed through my mind. Emily. The missing girl. The child who had vanished 3 years ago. The child whose case had never been solved. The child who, according to every report, every investigator, and every piece of evidence, should have been gone forever. Yet somehow her voice had just come through a 911 call. Not only that, but according to Lisa, the final words on the recording were even more disturbing. He won't let me leave. The sentence repeated itself inside my head. Not I can't leave. Not I'm lost. Not help me. He won't let me leave. The implication was impossible to ignore. Someone was with her. Or at least someone had been. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and stared at the farmhouse. Every window was dark. Every room appeared empty. Yet the feeling of being watched had only grown stronger. Somewhere inside that house, something wasn't right. Dispatch, start another unit my way. Copy, how far out? The closest deputy is 28 minutes. I looked at the house again. 28 minutes felt like forever. If there was even the slightest chance a child was inside, I couldn't wait. I approached the front door and knocked hard. Sheriff's office! The sound echoed across the property. Nothing. I knocked again. Still nothing. The silence that followed felt unnatural. The entire property seemed frozen. No insects, no animals, no distant traffic, nothing I tried the handle, locked. Moving around the side of the house, I found a shattered window large enough to climb through. Cobwebs stretched across the frame, but several strands had been broken recently. Not enough to prove someone had entered, but enough to make me pause. I climbed inside. The smell hit immediately. Dust, mold, rotting wood, the stale scent of a building abandoned for years. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Furniture remained scattered throughout the room, exactly where it had been left. A couch sat facing an old television. Books lined shelves against the wall. Family photographs rested on tables beneath thick layers of dust. Everything looked untouched, and yet something felt wrong. I moved through the house slowly, clearing each room. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. The dining room was empty. But there were signs, small signs. A ceramic mug sat on the kitchen counter, clean. Every other surface in the room was covered in dust. Not the mug. A chair had been pulled away from the dining table. Not much, just enough to suggest someone had been sitting there recently. Then there was the smell, a faint scent, soap, shampoo, something clean, something recent, completely out of place. I radioed dispatch, still clearing the residence. Copy. You getting anything from utilities? A few moments later, Lisa responded. Power disconnected over 3 years ago. I looked around the dark room, then explained the light. No answer. Because she couldn't. Neither could I. The staircase sat at the end of a narrow hallway. As I approached it, my flashlight landed on a family photograph hanging crooked on the wall. I stopped. The image showed a mother, a father, and a smiling little girl, Emily Harper. Seeing her face changed everything. This wasn't just a case anymore. This wasn't just a file. This had been a real child, a real family, a real tragedy. I continued upstairs. Halfway up, my flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then a third time. The batteries were brand new. I checked them earlier that evening. The beam steadied again, but my uneasiness continued growing. At the top of the stairs, several doors lined the hallway. I cleared each room one by one. Empty, empty, storage, empty. Then I reached the final door. Unlike the others, it was closed. The faded pink paint immediately stood out. A small wooden butterfly hung from the center. A child's room. I slowly pushed the door open. The hinges groaned softly, and the moment my flashlight entered the room, I stopped moving. Because the room wasn't abandoned. The rest of the farmhouse looked frozen in decay. This room looked preserved. The bed was perfectly made. Stuffed animals sat neatly arranged against pillows. Books lined shelves. Drawings covered the walls. A backpack rested beside a desk. It looked as though Emily had simply stepped out for the day and never returned. I walked slowly into the room. The contrast was impossible to ignore. No dust, no mold, no cobwebs, nothing. 3 years had passed. Yet this room looked untouched by time, as though someone had been maintaining it. The thought made my stomach tighten. I remained standing in the center of the room for several seconds, studying every detail. Children's drawings covered one wall. A row of stuffed animals sat perfectly arranged on the bed. School books remained neatly stacked on a shelf. A half-finished coloring book rested beside a box of crayons. Everything felt wrong, not frightening. Wrong. The room felt occupied, not physically, emotionally, as though Emily's presence still lingered there. My flashlight moved across the walls. That's when I noticed the drawings. At first they seemed normal. Family portraits, trees, animals, school projects. Then I noticed something strange. A figure, standing in the background, watching. I moved to another drawing. The figure appeared again. Another drawing, again, and another. Always watching, always standing somewhere nearby. Always drawn completely in black crayon. No face, no features, just a dark silhouette. The consistency disturbed me. Children draw monsters all the time. But this wasn't random. Emily had drawn the same figure repeatedly, dozens of times, as though she knew exactly what it looked like. I found school papers stacked inside a folder on the desk. Most looked normal: math assignments, reading exercises, spelling tests. Then I found one that caught my attention. The assignment asked students to draw their family. Emily had drawn herself, her mother, her father, and behind the farmhouse, the dark figure. Her teacher had written a question beneath the drawing: who is the person behind the house? Emily's answer was written below: he lives here too. A chill ran through me. I carefully returned the paper and approached the desk. A child's journal sat neatly on top. The cover featured cartoon stars. I opened it carefully. Most pages contained ordinary childhood memories: school, friends, birthdays, family trips. Then the entries changed. October 4th, Daddy is mad again. October 6th, Mommy says not to go into the basement anymore. October 8th, I heard somebody talking downstairs. October 9th, Daddy says there's nobody there. October 11th, I know somebody is there. I continued reading. The handwriting became shakier with each entry. More nervous, more frightened. Then I reached the final page. October 14th. He was outside my room again. Nothing after that. Just blank pages. Emily disappeared on October 15th. One day later, my heart pounded. Then a loud crash echoed from downstairs. I nearly jumped. The sound was violent, like something had fallen. Training took over instantly. I drew my weapon and moved into the hallway. Listening, waiting, silence, complete silence. I radioed dispatch. Possible movement inside residence. Copy. Backup is 19 minutes out. Still too far. I searched the entire first floor again. Every room, every corner, every doorway. Nothing. Then I found the source of the noise. The family photograph. The one hanging on the wall. It now lay face down on the floor. The nail remained in place, yet somehow the frame had fallen outward, almost as if someone had pulled it from the wall. I crouched beside it. The back panel had broken open. Something was hidden inside. An envelope, yellowed with age. On the front, written in black marker, was a single word: Sheriff. My pulse quickened. I opened it. Inside was a folded note and a child's drawing. The drawing showed the farmhouse. Emily stood outside. Beside her was a tall figure, a figure with no face, only darkness. Above the drawing were 5 words written in a child's handwriting: he lives under the house. At that exact moment, heavy footsteps thundered across the floor directly above me. Fast, violent, impossible, because I had already cleared the second floor. And I knew, absolutely knew, nobody was supposed to be up there. Part 3. The detective who quit the footsteps lasted only a few seconds, but they were unmistakable, heavy, fast, deliberate, running across the floor above me. I stood frozen beside the fallen photograph, weapon drawn and flashlight raised, listening for any sign of movement. The house immediately fell silent again. Complete silence. The kind of silence that makes you question whether what you heard actually happened. Every instinct screamed the same thing: someone was upstairs. Yet that made no sense. I had already cleared every room, every closet, every corner. There had been nobody there. I radioed dispatch immediately. Dispatch, I have possible movement on the second floor. Lisa responded almost instantly. Copy. Backup ETA, 14 minutes, still too far. I slowly made my way back toward the staircase. The farmhouse felt different now. More oppressive, more aware. Like it was watching me move through its halls. Halfway up the stairs, my flashlight beam landed on something that hadn't been there before. Mud. A single muddy footprint. Fresh. Wet. Sitting on the wooden floor at the top of the stairs. I stared at it. The print wasn't large enough to belong to a grown man. But it wasn't small enough to belong to a young child either. It sat somewhere in between, and it was wet. That was impossible. There hadn't been rain in nearly a week. I followed the prints down the hallway. One, then another, each one leading toward Emily's bedroom. My stomach tightened. The door was closed. I knew I had left it open. Slowly, I pushed it inward. The room appeared unchanged. The bed, the stuffed animals, the desk, the drawings, everything exactly where it had been before. Then my flashlight landed on the journal. It was open. I froze. When I left the room, I distinctly remembered closing it. Now it sat open to the final page. The page containing Emily's last entry. October 14th. He was outside my room again. But there was something else now. Something that absolutely had not been there before. Fresh writing. Scrawled beneath the original entry. The words looked rushed, uneven, desperate. I stepped closer and read them. He knows you're here. Every hair on my body stood up. I immediately grabbed my department-issued phone and photographed everything. The page, the ink, the journal, the room, every possible angle. My brain searched desperately for a logical explanation. Maybe someone was hiding inside the house. Maybe somebody had slipped past me somehow. Maybe I had missed something. Then the radio exploded with static. Not normal interference, violent static, loud enough to make me flinch. I grabbed the microphone. Dispatch? Nothing, only static. Then a voice emerged through the noise. A little girl's voice, weak, terrified. Deputy. My blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't in the hallway. It wasn't behind me. It wasn't upstairs. It was coming through the radio. Deputy, please don't go downstairs. The transmission ended instantly. Dead silence. I stared at the radio in disbelief. Then dispatch returned. Ethan, do you copy? My voice felt unsteady. Did you hear that? Hear what? The little girl. A pause. Then Lisa answered. Ethan, I didn't hear anyone. For the first time that night, I felt genuine fear. Not concern, not caution. Fear. Because I knew exactly what I had heard. And I knew dispatch wasn't playing games. Something was terribly wrong. When backup finally arrived, I was relieved to see Deputy Ryan Mercer step out of his vehicle. Ryan had 10 years on patrol and was one of the most level-headed officers in the department. If there was a rational explanation for everything happening inside the farmhouse, Ryan would find it. Together we searched the house again. Every room, every hallway, every closet, every crawl space. Nothing. No intruder. No signs of forced entry. No evidence anyone had been living there. Nothing except Emily's room. Ryan spent nearly 20 minutes examining the journal, especially the final message. He knows you're here. What do you think? I asked. Ryan stared at the page. Finally, he shrugged. Looks like somebody's messing with you. How? Maybe a squatter. Where is he? Ryan didn't answer, because he couldn't. We both knew there was nowhere left to hide. The farmhouse was secured before sunrise. Crime scene tapes surrounded the property. Detectives were notified. Additional patrol checks were scheduled. Then I went home. And that's when things became worse. Because once I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about Emily Harper, the missing child, the hidden drawing, the voice on the radio, the journal. None of it made sense. I tried sleeping. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's bedroom, the untouched bed, the faceless figure in the drawings, the words written inside the journal. By mid-afternoon, I gave up. Instead of sleeping, I drove to headquarters and requested the complete Harper case file. 3 thick binders were placed in front of me. I spent hours reading every report, every interview, every witness statement, every photograph. And what I found surprised me. The original investigation had been massive. State resources, search and rescue teams, K-9 units, helicopters, volunteer groups, hundreds of people. For nearly 2 weeks. Nothing, no suspects, no evidence, no body, no answers. Emily had simply vanished. Then I found something strange. A name, Detective Thomas Grayson. Lead investigator. 22 years of experience. An outstanding reputation. Multiple homicide cases solved. Several major arrests. One of the best detectives in the department's history. Yet according to personnel records, Grayson retired only 6 months after Emily disappeared. Early. Unexpectedly. No explanation, no public statement, no farewell ceremony. Just gone. The timing bothered me. Good detectives don't suddenly walk away from their careers, especially not after a high-profile missing child case. I dug deeper. Several investigators who had worked under Grayson transferred shortly after the case ended. One resigned completely. Another requested a different district. A third took early retirement. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Something had happened during that investigation, something nobody wanted to talk about. I found a phone number for Grayson and called it. To my surprise, he answered. The moment I introduced myself, his tone changed. Detective Grayson? A pause. Former detective. I'm Deputy Ethan Cole. Another pause. Then, is this about Emily Harper? The question caught me completely off guard. How did you know? Several seconds passed. Then Grayson sighed, a long, exhausted sigh, like bearing a burden for years. I was wondering when somebody would call. A chill ran through me. What does that mean? Meet me. He gave me an address. A cabin nearly 40 miles away in the mountains. Then he hung up. No explanation, nothing, just an address. I drove there immediately. The cabin sat beside a lake surrounded by dense forest. It looked isolated from the rest of the world, the kind of place someone chooses when they want to disappear. Grayson answered the door before I even knocked. He looked much older than his department photo. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who hadn't slept properly in years. We sat on the porch overlooking the water. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he finally broke the silence. You went into the farmhouse. It wasn't a question. I nodded. His expression darkened immediately. You heard her. My stomach tightened. Emily? He stared at the lake, then quietly answered. Yes. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me all day. What happened to her? Grayson rubbed his face. The look in his eyes was something I'll never forget. Not sadness, not grief. Guilt, pure guilt. We never found Emily. I know? No. He looked directly at me. You don't. The words sent a chill through my entire body. Then he leaned forward and told me something no report contained. Something the department never released publicly. Something buried so deeply that even most investigators never knew it existed. 3 years earlier, during the search for Emily Harper, they discovered something beneath the farmhouse. Not the basement. Something deeper. A hidden room. A room that didn't appear on any building plans. A room concealed beneath the foundation itself. And according to Thomas Grayson, everything changed the moment they entered it. Part 4. The trapdoor. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I wasn't tired. I was exhausted. Mentally, physically, emotionally. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image. The photograph. The hidden room. The faceless figure standing in the corner. Watching. Waiting. And behind all of it lingered the same feeling that had followed me since entering the farmhouse. The feeling that something wasn't finished. Emily Harper had called 911. Whether that was possible or impossible no longer mattered. The recording existed. Dispatch had received it. I had heard her voice. And somehow, 3 years after disappearing, she was still trying to tell someone something. By sunrise, I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by documents. Case reports, photographs, copies of journal entries, notes from my meeting with Thomas Grayson, Emily's drawing, the hidden envelope. Everything connected to the case was spread across the table. I spent hours reviewing the same material again and again, looking for something I had missed. Some detail hidden in plain sight. Eventually, my eyes settled on Emily's drawing. The farmhouse, the faceless figure, the words written above it. He lives under the house. At first glance, it looked like normal childhood artwork. But the longer I stared at it, the more details began to emerge. Tiny details. Things I should have noticed immediately. The basement window looked different from every other window in the drawing. While the upstairs and first floor windows were simple squares, the basement window had been shaded, completely black. Not partially, completely, as if Emily wanted to draw attention to it. I moved closer. Then I noticed something inside the darkness, a shape. Tiny, almost invisible. A hand. My pulse quickened. I scanned the drawing and enlarged it on my computer. The image became grainy, but the shape remained. A small hand pressed against the basement window from the inside. A chill moved through me, because Emily had drawn it intentionally. She wanted someone to see it, and somehow nobody ever had. Not detectives, not investigators, not her parents, not me, until now. I drove to headquarters immediately. The evidence room still contained several boxes from the original Harper investigation. Most cold cases eventually disappear into storage, and Emily's case was no exception. After some convincing, the records clerk allowed me access. For nearly 3 hours, I searched through crime scene photographs, witness statements, search reports, and investigator notes. Then I found it. A photograph taken during the second day of the original investigation. The basement window. I enlarged the image, then zoomed in, and my heart nearly stopped. Because there it was, a handprint, small, child-sized, pressed against the inside of the glass, exactly where Emily had drawn it. The handprint had never been documented. No report mentioned it. No investigator highlighted it. Somehow it had been overlooked. But now it changed everything, because suddenly Emily's drawings no longer looked imaginary. They looked like evidence. I returned to the drawing and examined every line, every detail, every scribble. Then I noticed something else, the trees. Emily had drawn 12 trees behind the farmhouse. 11 looked normal. 1 did not. One tree had an X carved into its trunk, a deliberate mark, a message, another clue. I didn't know it yet, but that tree would change everything. Later that afternoon, I visited Sarah Harper, Emily's mother. The drive took nearly an hour. Sarah lived far from Hollow Creek Road now, far from the farmhouse, far from the memories. Yet when she opened the door, it was obvious she had never escaped them. Grief lingered around her like a shadow. Her eyes looked tired, not from lack of sleep, from years of carrying something too heavy to put down. I introduced myself and explained why I was there. The moment I mentioned Emily's name, tears filled her eyes. 3 years had passed. The wound was still open. Some wounds never close. Sarah invited me inside. We sat at a small kitchen table while afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains. Family photographs covered the walls. Most included Emily, smiling, laughing, living. The conversation started normally. Questions about the original investigation. Questions about Emily's behavior before she disappeared. Questions about the farmhouse. Then I showed her the drawing. The moment she saw it, her face went pale. "Where did you get this?" "It was hidden in the house." Sarah stared at it for several seconds, then whispered something that immediately caught my attention. "She drew him again." I leaned forward. "Again?" Sarah nodded slowly. "He wasn't only in this picture." Without another word, she stood and disappeared into another room. A few moments later, she returned carrying a cardboard storage box. She placed it on the table between us. Inside were dozens of drawings, years of drawings, school projects, birthday pictures, family portraits, animals, trees, houses, and scattered throughout nearly every stack. The same figure, the faceless man, watching from windows, standing behind trees, peering from doorways, hiding behind fences, always present, always observing, always drawn completely black. Sarah sat silently while I looked through them. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. Emily started drawing him 6 months before she disappeared. 6 months, not days, not weeks, months. That meant whatever was happening had been building long before she vanished. "Did she ever tell you who he was?" I asked. Sarah nodded. She called him the man under the house. The exact same phrase, the exact same words. My pulse quickened. What else did she say? Sarah looked toward the window, then answered quietly. She said he talked to her. A knot formed in my stomach. How? through the vents. The room suddenly felt colder. Sarah explained that at first they assumed Emily had created an imaginary friend. Any parent would. Children hear noises. They invent stories. They imagine things hiding in closets and beneath beds. But Emily's fear never faded. It grew. She refused to sleep alone, refused to enter the basement, refused to go outside after dark. And every time her parents asked why, she gave the same answer: because the man under the house was watching her. Then Sarah revealed something she had never told investigators. 3 weeks before Emily disappeared, she woke around 3 in the morning and found Emily standing at the basement door, talking, not crying, not screaming, talking, as if having a conversation. Sarah immediately opened the basement door. Nobody was there. The basement was completely empty, but Emily looked terrified. When asked who she had been speaking to, she gave the same answer she always gave: the man under the house. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Then Sarah quietly added, "He told her she was special." A chill moved through me. He told her he was lonely. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. And he told her one day she'd come live with him. I didn't know how to respond, because suddenly Emily's disappearance felt less like a random event and more like a countdown, something that had been building for months, maybe years. Then Sarah said something else, something she had never included in her statement, something that made my heart stop. The night before Emily disappeared, I leaned forward. "What happened?" Sarah stared at the drawing, then whispered, "She told me he wasn't under the house anymore." The room felt ice cold. What did she mean? Sarah's voice trembled. She said he was inside now. The silence that followed felt endless. I left shortly afterward, not because I wanted to, because I needed air, needed space, needed time to think. Everything pointed back to the farmhouse. Everything pointed beneath it: the hidden room, the drawings, the journal, the basement window, the handprint, the faceless figure. And then I remembered the tree marked with an X. By the time darkness fell, I was already driving back toward Hollow Creek Road. The farmhouse appeared exactly as I remembered it. Silent, empty, waiting. This time I didn't enter immediately. Instead, I walked behind the property and searched the tree line. One by one, I counted the trees from Emily's drawing. 8, 9, 10, 11, then 12. And there it was, an old pine tree, a faded X carved deep into the bark. My heart pounded. The carving was old, years old. I shined my flashlight around the base. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed disturbed ground. A shallow depression hidden beneath leaves and roots. Something had been buried there once. Or perhaps something had been dug out. I knelt down and brushed away the dirt. Then my flashlight caught something metallic, rusted, half-buried, a small chain, the kind used on children's jewelry. I pulled it free. Attached to it was a tiny silver charm, the letter E. Emily. The night suddenly felt much darker, because for the first time since the investigation began, I wasn't finding stories. I wasn't finding rumors. I was finding evidence. And every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Back beneath the farmhouse, back to the hidden room, back to the trapdoor, despite Grayson's warning. Despite every instinct telling me to walk away, I had already made my decision. Tomorrow night, I was going back underground. And this time, I wasn't leaving until I discovered what was waiting beneath the house.